Hello. This is going to be a relatively quick video. I know I say that, but it's going to be a short-ish video that is going to give you a little bit of detail on the tax resources, i.e. the places where we can actually find the tax law that we need or that we would want guidance for. And I'm not talking about secondary sources where you are looking at commercial outlines, or I'm talking more about in practice. Where would you go to find the information that you want in order to better serve your client? Okay, so I've talked about the regulations in class, and I've talked about how important they are. So obviously, once you have looked through the code, you want to check the regulations to see the explanation. Okay, so theoretically, at least, the regulations are in regular English-ish. So they're supposed to be a bit of a guide. And in many cases, it does simplify the language and give you some concrete examples that you would want to use. So what kind of regulations are there? Well, for our purposes, we have regulations that are issued by the IRS, and we also have regulations that are issued by Treasury. It gives guidance, and it addresses issues with regard to existing code sections. So it interprets and gives directions on complying with the law. These proposed regulations and final rules are published in the Federal Register. I'm sure you guys learned about that when you were in LARW. So we can go on to the next thing. We've mentioned this in class before, but I want to make sure everybody understands. If you see a regulation, this is an example of a regulation number. The first part of the number gives the part of the code. So 1 is income tax. 20 would be estate tax, and 25 would be gift tax. After the period, we've got the actual section number that is being explained. Okay, so in this one, it's section 195 that the regulations pertain to. And the dash 2, it's the series number. So it would be the second regulation that would be related to 195. So this is for the Treasury regulations. Okay. What are Treasury regulations? Well, they're done by the Secretary of Treasury to promulgate rules and regulations with regard to the enforcement of the tax laws. So final and proposed regs, as I said before, are published in the Federal Register, sometimes temporary regs too. If it's a proposed reg, remember that you have to go through a period of notice and comment before they're effective, and then you would have a final regulation issued. But sometimes a temporary regulation is done at the same time as a proposed reg if they want to actually make sure that they have immediate effect. Okay, temporary regs are valid for no more than 3 years, but if it's something that they don't want to wait for notice and comment before having it take effect, then they can do them together. Okay, so here we have a little bit of information about the different types of regs: proposed, temporary, and final. I don't know how to move my head, so last time I tried that, it kept my head entirely out. So that may be the result you want. Maybe we can do that later in this video too. But you see proposed, temporary, and final, and then it gives a description of what they are, where is it, how is it issued, and the weight of authority. I think weight of authority is something that you might find important here. Proposed regs are not regulations that can be relied upon. You can't use those for doing tax planning unless the IRS clearly states otherwise that there's something that can be relied upon. It's more for, hey, look what's coming down the road, okay? It can be useful in indicating the IRS's position, and when the IRS is interpreting the law, and it also does allow for input into the lawmaking process. Why would you want to know the IRS's position on a law, even if it's not something that you think is valid? Think of it akin to discovery. Okay, in the discovery process, we have you like to know what the other side is going to do. You like to have a little bit of predictability. So the more information you have, if this is what they think the law is, then you've done discovery, if you will, of a sort, and you can tailor your responses to rebut the law that they say, their interpretation of the law, without actually having to go through an expensive discovery process. Temporary regs, same thing. It is published, it provides guidance until final regs are adopted. These are actually valid, okay? It has the same authority as final regulations, it's just for a limited time, okay? Generally from the date that's issued. It's published by Treasury decision. Final regulations, they provide guidance for tax compliance and planning purposes. These have the highest authority, okay? And like I said, temporary and final regulations have the same weight. It's just one sunsets after, it's only good for 3 years. So there are 3 types of Treasury regs here. Okay, we have legislative. Okay, legislative regulations. These are authorized under the code, that it authorizes the IRS to provide operational rules that deal with specific IRS provisions. Legislative regulations generally carry the same weight of authority as the law itself, and the regulations will typically refer to its statutory authority. They must follow notice and comment requirements. Okay. So when we deal with interpretive regulations, okay, we see that these help explain the IRS's position on various sections. They're issued under the IRS's general authority to interpret language in the Internal Revenue Code, but they are not specifically authorized by law. They're subject to challenge if they do not reflect congressional intent. They often carry substantial weight of authority. You know, interpretive regulations are exempt from the notice and comment requirements. And procedural regulations, number 3, they address procedural rather than interpretive matters, you know, such as, you know, how to go about filing returns, how do you make particular elections. They're considered to be binding, generally speaking, these procedural regulations, but they are the regulations that are set forth in 26 CFR 601. These are the statement of procedural rules, are considered to be directive and not mandatory. Okay, these provide guidelines for conducting the internal affairs of the IRS, and these are issued by the IRS commissioner without the signature of the Treasury secretary. Nevertheless, the procedural rules are published in the Federal Register. They do have the status of regulations, so such rules have a high weight of authority. They have a higher weight than other IRS pronouncements that are not published in the Federal Register. Okay, so how much weight do we give regulations? Okay, when we're looking at Treasury regulations, most regulations, unless they're legislative, are Treasury's opinion of what the law says. Congress makes the laws, not the IRS. You know, we've talked before about the fact that one of my pet peeves is the IRS code. It's not the IRS's code, it's Congress's code. You know, so Congress makes the laws. The IRS interprets it to the best of their ability, but these are human beings and they are not part of the legislative process, except for things that are delegated specifically in their legislative regulations. But that's not what we're talking about. Regulations that are made by these are given weight as long as there's no direct conflict with the code itself. If we have a conflict between the regulations and the code, then the code will win. You know, and sometimes the IRS does get regulations wrong. They get their interpretation wrong. So you occasionally can have situations where you get to challenge a regulation in court, and that's kind of fun. But you know, take them with a grain of salt. These are very useful because these are the IRS's pronouncement on this is what we think the law is. And again, like I said earlier, it's kind of like discovery. It's like, okay, so this is what the other side thinks. We will tailor everything to address all of their points. And hopefully, may the best woman or man win. As I said earlier, legislative regulations have force of law. These are expressly delegated to the Secretary of the Treasury. It's usually indicated by language made at such time and in such manner as the Secretary may by regulation prescribe. These are the delegation language. So example, I give section 385A as an example. Don't think you care. There's other guidance that's provided that lets you know what the law would be in a particular situation. And I've got a list of some of those. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. I know I say quickly. You know what I mean by quickly. It's the Macmillan quickly, which isn't that quickly. Revenue rulings, internal revenue bulletins. What do these things mean as far as imparting information? First one, revenue rulings. You guys already have seen a revenue ruling because you printed one out, and this is where you got the list of the tax brackets that are adjusted for inflation. It's an official interpretation of the law. It's equivalent to a public administrative ruling. These are based on a specific set of facts. These can be relied upon as by taxpayers, all taxpayers, not just the ones who requested the ruling. But again, when you have something like this, just like you're probably taught in LARW, realize the limitations of something like this. These are all dependent on a set of facts. So if your facts can be distinguished, okay. These are also based on what the law is at the time. So if you have jurisprudence that follows after that changes the law or puts it on a slightly different path, that's important to know, as well as any legislative changes. So revenue rulings are a snapshot in time that you would want to make sure are still valid when you go to rely on them. Internal revenue bulletins, these are basically the way that announcements are made. It's used to announce rulings and procedures and for certain decisions, et cetera, et cetera. From my perspective as a recovering practitioner, acquiescence and non-acquiescence orders, these are action on demands, and these are used to alert service personnel and the public to the position that the the IRS will take on a particular case. And it is something that has always infuriated me when they do a non-acquiescence notice. This is basically when they say, yeah, we just lost in court. I don't think we're going to appeal it, but we still disagree with the outcome. So yeah, suck it. Okay, I don't think they quite say suck it, but that's what I read into it, which is why they annoy me. The acquiescence is, yeah, they won. Yeah, we give up. So this sets the tone for what the IRS personnel have to do. So if the IRS comes out with if the IRS chief counsel comes out with a non-acquiescence notice, all of their field personnel have to follow it. I come from a system where I believe that the laws are actually made by the legislature and the courts interpret them. And if the court says you're wrong, you either appeal it and you might win at the appellate level. And if you don't, sucks to be you, you're wrong. And it has to be applied the way the court says. But no, this is not what a non-acquiescence is. It says we disagree. And so going forward, they're still going to apply the law as they see it, not as the court stated it is, which is aggravating. Aggravating. This is one of my, crazy Muppet moments where I'm like, ah! But it is useful in one way, though, because as I said earlier, discovery, at least you know the position that they're going to be starting with. And it allows you to tell your client, okay, here's our options. This is what the law says. However, the IRS is going to fight us on it because that's what they do. And they've indicated that they disagree with the courts on this. So here are your options. And then you can check out the how risk adverse your client is and how constrained they are going to be. If they don't want to litigate, then you're going to take the position that the IRS is stating because they're going to fall in line. But if they're like, yeah, heck yeah, I want the outcome that the IRS says no to, but the court says yes, so let's fight. It's going to cost a little bit of money, but let's do it. So it allows you to make, to inform your client so that they can have an informed decision about what they want to do. So I guess it is useful in that way. Private letter rulings are written decisions in response to a request by specific taxpayers for guidance in a specific case. They're very specific fact patterns, and they can't be used as precedent by other taxpayers. Now, the IRS can actually make it binding by reissuing the private letter ruling as a revenue ruling. Obviously they redact personal information, but and in which case you can rely on it. But for a private letter ruling, you can't rely on it. But what you can do is at least get a gist of what else has gone on. What has the service said before? The person who uses it can actually rely on it, but nobody else can. The requests under a private letter ruling have to be before the tax return relating to whatever you're asking about is due. So it's typically for a future transaction or a contemplated transaction. They do not comment in a private letter ruling on something that is already a controversy. And by the way, they charge for this stuff. It isn't free. So, you probably wouldn't go this route for small clients. Okay, delegation orders. These are just orders done by the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue, delegating authority for certain tasks. It's usually in the context of criminal or civil tax cases. And internal revenue notices. These are usually technical notices that deal with things like inflation adjustment. We talked about inflation and how your brackets are adjusted every year for inflation. So this is where the adjustment factors would be published in order for them to be used for bracket adjustments. Determination letters, these are kind of like what we saw, but they're specifically in the context of exempt organizations and employee benefit plans. It's a formal document. Basically, they're trying to figure out if the tax requirements are met for these types of organizations, whether it's the benefit plan or an exempt organization. So it's basically the equivalent we're talking about with private letter rulings, only in the context of these specific types of organizations. Information letters are kind of a neat little thing. These are advisory. There is no binding effect, but if the national office will furnish them in response to inquiries about what the law is. They're kind of generic. They're often given out by congresspersons, and both given to congresspersons when trying to get them educated about what the law specifically is, or if they want to pass it on to some of their constituencies. So it's kind of a neat service that they offer. Obviously, it'd have to be generic and not with response to a fact pattern, because that would be legal advice, and that's not what they're doing here. And finally, a TAM, Technical Advice Memorandum. There's also technical expedited advice memorandums, but essentially these are issued by national office, I believe, to help IRS personnel. So it gives guidance down the chain on something that is new or novel, or something that their field personnel are having difficulty with. So they'll put a request into national office, chief counsel's office, to try to understand and ask for more specifics on what the law is. So once a TAM is issued, it gives the IRS's final determination with respect to that particular issue. And these are usually handled pretty quickly because, they're internal, but we do have access to see what they're like. And this is with regard to specific facts, so it can also be helpful. Now, the things I've talked about previously give you substantive, or at least some of them, give you substantive understanding of what the law is. But I thought I'd be remiss here if I didn't at least mention Circular 230. If you are practicing in front of the IRS, and I'm going to put a big asterisk there, okay? If you're practicing in front of the IRS, there's a specific set of rules that deal with ethics. You say, well, I've got my PR rules, but these are specifically with regard to practicing in front of the IRS. Many of you are going, it won't apply to me because I'm so not going anywhere near tax law once I'm done with Macmillan's class. Here's the thing. It is a very expanded definition. So if you touch anything that the IRS touches, you are going to be caught by Circular 230 and all the guidelines that are involved. If you answer a client's question about tax, even if you're like, I'm not a tax lawyer, but I know this one, that won't be income because it is a gift and it's below any gift threshold. So we're okay here. That's practicing in front of the IRS. Anything to do with the Internal Revenue Code is practicing in front of the IRS. Plus, Another expanded part of the definition deals with anything administered by the IRS, and right now that includes parts of the Affordable Care Act. So don't think and get complacent with, well, I'm not a tax lawyer, so I'm not caught by these particular rules. It would behoove you in this class to at least take a look at the circular so that you can understand the rules. There are specific educational, ethical, and procedural guidelines that are required. And if you go to work for a firm, and even if you do a little bit of tax law, or if you have your own firm, it's something that you really should know. And I put the link for it. You can easily Google it on the IRS website. It comes up, but it's in very easy to understand language. And I usually do an annual CLE on it. If you guys are really desperate, you can ask me, and we can put you in the annual seminar for free. But I'll go into more depth. But at least take a look at the document. And I've also heard from some of you that you wouldn't mind some annotation. Understand that on Westlaw, you can actually get a copy of an annotated code. I mean, admittedly, you have to go in through Westlaw to look at it, but there are some annotations that might be helpful. And I put that information here. So anyway, hopefully this is a shorter video than the last one I just made. And it is of use to you in understanding the various sources of where you can find information to help you determine what the law is. Thanks.